Hi, I am Kiki Aranita, and I was one of the co-chefs and owners of Poi Dog Philly when it was a restaurant and food truck. So this year has upended quite a lot in the world, but also in my life. And now Poi Dog has become something quite different. So I have served food and been involved with the fundraiser for Women Against Abuse for quite a few years now, since we just had a food truck 8 years ago. And so this is the first time that the benefit's going to be taking place in my home kitchen. But today I'm going to be sharing something that I wish I could make for you in person. We are going to be making together Limu Poke. So this is very similar to the Ahi Poke, the shoyu Ahi Poke that I served previously at Poi Dog. And it is one of my favorite dishes from growing up in Hawaii. It is pretty standard Hawaiian food nowadays. So Poi Dog was a restaurant that didn't only serve Hawaii's food, but really served the food that was rooted in the cuisines of everybody who had come to work in Hawaii on its sugarcane and pineapple plantations. So there are multiple influences in this still pretty traditional limu poke. And I'll break down the parts for you, but I want to tell you a little bit about the dish first. So typically, this would be served over rice. You would see, if you look very close, you can see the fresh ahi, the fresh ginger, and the limu, which is the Hawaiian word for seaweed. And this particular seaweed is called ogonori, or ogo, and is actually from Hawaii. I bring it over normally in my suitcases to serve in the restaurant. So we also have ala'ea salt in here, which you can't see. It is a red clay salt of a coarse medium grain, and this is what it looks like. There's also sweet onion in here, as well as green onions and the wonderful aromas of shoyu, or soy sauce, and toasted sesame oil. So a poke bowl is made a poke bowl by the rice that goes underneath it. This was the spicy ahi poke and the shoyu ahi poke were our two best sellers at Poi Dog when it was in Rittenhouse. And other ways that we would serve it would be as pupus. So for the benefit for Women Against Abuse, several times I recall serving salmon poke and ahi poke on little pieces of really wonderfully flavored Korean seaweed. So it's like a handheld little snack, and also on a wonton chip. So these I popped in the air fryer for about 8 minutes or so, 300 degrees, and they turn into these wonderful chips. If you have a deep fryer, which I don't at home, you can of course deep fry them, and they turn out wonderful and bubbly and really, really delicious. But this is an excellent holder for just a little bite of ahi poke, and it will make your ahi poke go really a long way. One note, I am working on these, and this will hopefully become a much larger line. But these sauces are based on some of the things that we served at Poi Dog. So if you came to the Rittenhouse storefront, on our marble countertop, there was always this unlabeled squeeze bottle of red chili water. So this is based on that. This is chili pepper water, which is something that you find on like every single table in Hawaii. Like I always say diners, drivers, and dives, unfortunately, but seriously, like all the diners, the drive-ins, and the dives will have a bottle of chili pepper water, typically homemade, on the table. This one is, of course, fancied up a little bit with a palaka background. Palaka is the fabric that all the plantation laborers wore. And it's a very special pattern to me because my grandmother worked in the plantation store in the sewing department, in the notions department, and sold this very fabric. So this is a tribute to her. And another wonderful thing that came out of running a restaurant for so long and doing events was my recipe for a Maui lavender ponzu sauce. And this is also being bottled and it's sold online at poidogphilly.com. But also De Bruno's, Herman's Coffee, Vernick Wine, Audrey Claire Cook, and basically all the shops and stores run by my very good friends. So very, very lucky to have a supportive community here in Philadelphia. So that said, I think we are ready to start cooking. The things that you will need to create this dish are, of course, ahi. Poke doesn't have to be fish. Poke means to dice or to cut, and that can refer to fish, breadfruit, tofu, and many other wonderful proteins. But in this particular instance, we are using beautiful fresh ahi that I actually trimmed down and skinned right before this. So, excuse my hands, you're going to see that it is missing a bloodline. I cut that out already. I didn't clean it up too much. All I did was cut out the bloodline, which you should save and either turn into like a tuna salad or a special treat for your favorite pups. And I also skinned this prior to this demo. So I'm going to wash my hands again because this has been the year of overly washing your hands. I'm going to put up my hair and I will be right back. So, how to go from this to this. Other ingredients that I have in front of me, I have a sharp knife. This I wish was sharper than it currently is, but this is a beautiful, wonderful, and a little bit too large for my knife that I temporarily borrowed from my fiance. And it is made by one of our friends, Steve Pellegrino, so it is both a great knife and it has a lot of sentimental value. And I borrowed it for today because I have not been cooking in a professional kitchen for a few months, and so all my knives are dull. I also have a fish cutting board. I have different cutting boards for every application in this house because I tend to run my home kitchen like a restaurant kitchen. And so this particular cutting board is a fish board. Ala salt, macadamia nuts. So traditionally, in like the earliest forms of poke, which are actually not that early, you would be using inamona. And inamona is a condiment that is made from crushed kukui nuts. Kukui nuts in English are called candle nuts. They are a super fatty, oily nut that you can literally set on fire and use as candles. And that's what they were originally used for on long ocean voyages. So kukui nuts spoil super, super fast. That's why they're not really exported, and that is why we're using another fatty, oily nut that is commonly available, the macadamia nut, in place of inamona. This is important because this will give texture, richness, and butteriness, and of course that nutty flavor to your poke, and I would not make a shoyu poke without crushed macadamia nuts or kukui nuts. Ginger. So we are making limu poke today, and I know finding Hawaiian seaweed is not the easiest thing in the world. You can use gante, which is a Korean seaweed, and it's readily available online. Just pull it apart and you don't have to soak it. This is Hawaiian limu. This is ogonori. And you can get it online, but the dish is still going to be delicious if you totally omit it, because then you'll just have a shoyu poke. I have sweet onions, toasted sesame seeds, and the liquid ingredients that we have are sesame oil. So since you're going to be eating this fresh, I would use the best toasted sesame oil that you can find. Queen's Bucket makes really wonderful expeller pressed seed oils. I promise I don't work for them. They didn't ask me to say this. But I love their perilla oils and I love their sesame oils. They're really, really wonderful on fresh raw fish. And I wouldn't use something that could possibly be a little off or rancid in this application. I am getting to one of the most important ingredients in a shoyu ahi poke, or limu shoyu ahi poke, and that is of course the shoyu. And mine is in the most adorable little Hello Kitty bottle, because I am fancy. That's all. Use pretty like run-of-the-mill normal soy sauce for this. You can use something funkier. Like I definitely have a collection of funky soy sauces. But those are somewhat less common in Hawaii. In Hawaii, we typically use kikkoman or aloha shoyu, which are sort of like medium soy sauces. You're not going to be putting a lot in there. Add it little by little until you are comfortable with the salt content of your fish. I need to say this about shoyu because I would warn against using light shoyu. Light soy sauce is typically a lot saltier than dark soy sauce. So you don't want your fish to be over salty. And dark soy sauce is, of course, going to obscure the beautiful, bright red flesh of your ahi. So use the kikkoman. You're not going to use a whole lot of it. It's just really there for salt. And the ala salt is there for also salt, but texture. So we are ready for this guy over here. So if you have any hesitation about serving fish raw, then talk to the person who is selling you the fish. That person, that fishmonger, is going to know more about the origins of the fish than you do. They'll be able to tell you, like, yes, you can eat this raw, you can make poke with this, or like, no, maybe you should cook that. So all you have to do is talk to your fishmonger, talk to somebody who was in charge of ordering the fish or filleting the fish or whatever, and they will give you more information. I say this because a lot of people reach out to me and they ask me like, oh, can I use this fish for poke? And I'm like, well, find out where the fish came from. Find out how long it's been out of the water and if it's been stored properly. To store fish properly, wrap it in parchment, or if it's overnight, then saran wrap is fine. Put it over ice in a colander and then put that colander of ice over a mixing bowl. So this is not sashimi. This is not sushi. It is not beautifully cut. It is diced. So I would say that this is about, let's say, 0.6 pounds of fish. And then when you add the other ingredients, it's of course going to weigh a little bit more. There's no like cutting with the grain or cutting against the grain because all you're doing is just dicing up this really great fish. You want it in about 1 inch pieces, 1 inch dices, cubes. Even when you prepare the poke and say you don't finish the poke, then store it in a container over ice in a mixing bowl overnight. That will keep your poke fresh until the next day. And let's say you don't do this. All is not lost. You can still take that poke and make yourself a poke omelet. This is something that my dad used to do when I was little and not in charge of feeding myself. He would take leftover poke, which wasn't a common occurrence because poke is really, really delicious. He would take leftover poke, sear it in a really hot pan with a little bit of oil, and then fold it into a beaten egg and make a poke omelet that we would eat with rice. And it was so very delicious. So, mixing bowl, fish. I washed my knives immediately because that is a good habit, and make sure that my knives do not rust. I typically use Japanese knives that are not stainless steel, so they will rust. Okay, so we have our bowl of ahi. I would say this is like 0.6, 0.7 pounds. And I typically go dry ingredients first, starting with salt, and go light. You can always add after you taste it, but you can never take away. So, ahi, ala ea salt. That's about, I would say, less than 1/4 of a teaspoon. I know I like a lot of macadamia nuts, so I like how they're varying textures. Sprinkle it on, and I'm gonna put 2 whole teaspoons. I also like a lot of ginger. So this is about a teaspoon of ginger. Let's put half that first, and we can add more later. We have sweet onion that I like sliced paper thin. Add some of that. I'm gonna put sesame seeds in the poke and also on top. They're great for texture and make it look a lot fancier. And then I'm going to pull apart the ogo. It's gonna clump together anyway, it's fine, but when you put it in, try to pull it apart a little bit. Sesame oil. Let's say about a teaspoon. We can always add more. And really carefully on the shoyu, I would say that's not even a teaspoon. And then we mix it together. We grab some fresh green onion. I am lazy, so I am using scissors. And at this point, taste it. And I'm not changing that at all. That's a really good poke. Serve your poke as a poo-poo. Seaweed, just a little piece. Oh. Or on a wonton chip. You can add more sesame if you want. This looks pretty good to me. Perfect for a benefit, a culinary benefit. I'm not going to eat this in front of you because I will make a mess. But yeah, that's basically it. Limu Poke, shoyu ahi poke. It's also going to be my dinner.